By the time Ryan Mercer turned off the highway and onto the narrow mountain road, I had already decided this was a terrible idea. Not because I hated camping. I actually liked it. What I hated was the fact that Ryan had somehow convinced me to spend an entire weekend alone with the person who had been my best friend since we were 12. "You're doing that thing again," Ryan said from behind the wheel. "What thing?" "The thing where you stare out the window like you're planning an escape route." "I'm looking at the mountains." "You've been looking at the same tree for 3 minutes. I glanced at him. He was grinning, completely relaxed, one hand resting on the steering wheel. That familiar confidence had followed him through every stage of our lives. School, college, first jobs, breakups, bad apartments, birthdays, and every stupid decision in between. Ryan had always been the person who showed up. This weekend was supposed to be no different, except he had planned it. That was what bothered me. I had mentioned camping months ago, casually, the way people mention things they probably won't actually do. Ryan had remembered. He had found a campground, checked the trails, bought extra supplies, and even called ahead to make sure the site wasn't too far from the parking area. He had somehow remembered that I hated sleeping directly on the ground. "You really planned all this?" I asked. Ryan shrugged. "You said you wanted to go. I said it would be fun someday. Today is someday." I laughed despite myself. By late afternoon, we reached the campground. It was quieter than I expected, surrounded by tall trees and steep mountain slopes. Ryan unloaded the gear while I started putting together the tent. "You still tie knots like you're trying to strangle the rope," he said. "You still criticize everything I do. Only because you've been doing it wrong for 17 years. I threw the rope at him. He caught it easily. For a while, everything felt exactly like it always had. Then Ryan looked toward the sky. The change was subtle at first. Clouds had gathered above the mountains, darkening the afternoon light. A cold gust moved through the trees, carrying the smell of rain. Ryan checked his phone. "Looks like the storm might come in earlier than they predicted." I looked up. "How bad?" "Probably nothing serious." He said it casually, but his expression had changed. Another gust swept through the campground, stronger this time. Ryan looked at the tent, then toward the trail leading deeper into the trees. "If it gets worse," he said, "we'll move to the emergency shelter." I nodded. Then the wind hit again. The tent fabric snapped violently behind us. I turned instinctively, losing my balance for half a second. Ryan reached out and caught my arm before I could stumble. His hand stayed there for a moment. Then he looked at me. "You okay?" "Yeah." He released me. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the mountains. And suddenly, our quiet weekend didn't feel quite so simple anymore. The thunder rolled again, closer this time. Ryan's hand dropped from my arm, and for a few seconds neither of us said anything. Then another gust tore through the trees, sending loose branches skittering across the campground. "Okay," Ryan said. "We're moving. Now. Now." There was no panic in his voice, but there was enough seriousness to make me stop arguing. Ryan pulled open one of the packs and started removing anything we didn't absolutely need. Food, water, first aid supplies, flashlights. He moved quickly, checking each item before handing it to me. "Keep this dry," he said, passing me the first aid kit. "I know how to carry a first aid kit." "I know." "Then why are you telling me?" "Because you'll put it somewhere stupid." I smiled. "There he is." Ryan looked at me for half a second, then smiled back. The moment passed. We left the campsite as the first drops of rain began striking the leaves. The trail had already become slick beneath our shoes. Ryan walked ahead, carrying the heavier pack, while I followed with the supplies. Within minutes, the rain became harder. "Stay close," Ryan called. "I am close. You're 20 feet behind me. I'm trying not to fall." Ryan stopped and waited. I caught up and we continued together. The trail narrowed as it climbed. Water began running across the ground in thin streams, turning patches of dirt into mud. Ryan slowed whenever the slope became steeper, checking the trail before taking each step. At one point, a large branch cracked somewhere above us. Ryan turned immediately. "Evan," I looked up just as the branch came down. Ryan stepped toward me and shoved me backward. The branch struck the ground where I had been standing. For a second, neither of us moved. Ryan grabbed my shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No, you sure?" "Yes." He looked at me again, scanning my face and arms before finally stepping back. "I'm fine," I said. "I know. You don't look like you know." He exhaled and glanced toward the trail. "Come on." We kept moving. The emergency shelter was farther away than I remembered, but eventually its roof appeared through the trees. Ryan opened the door and waved me inside. I dropped the pack and leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Ryan immediately crouched beside me. "Your hand." I looked down. A small scrape ran across the back of my hand, probably from one of the branches. "It's nothing." I didn't say it was serious. "You're looking at it like it is. Because you always say it's nothing when something hurts. That is not true." Ryan raised an eyebrow. I laughed. He opened the first aid kit, cleaned the scrape, and wrapped it carefully. His fingers were steady. "You remember that?" I asked. "Remember what?" "That I do that." Ryan didn't look up. "I remember a lot about you." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. He finished securing the bandage and finally met my eyes. Outside, rain hammered against the shelter roof. Inside, Ryan stayed close. "When the storm started," he said quietly, "you were the first person I thought about getting somewhere safe." I stared at him. For once, neither of us joked. The rain did not let up. For a while, we simply listened to it hammer against the roof of the shelter. The sound was so constant that it almost became background noise, like the storm had decided to settle in with us. Ryan checked his phone. No signal. Great. He slipped it back into his pocket. "We have enough water for tonight. And food. Enough." That sounded convincing. It was supposed to. I smiled and Ryan shook his head. The shelter was small, just large enough for 2 people and the supplies we'd carried in. A narrow wooden bench ran along one wall. There was a small table beneath the window, and outside, the trees disappeared behind sheets of rain. Ryan unpacked the food while I sorted the supplies. Felt strangely familiar. We had always been good at this. When we were kids, Ryan would decide what we were doing, and I would figure out how to make it work. If he wanted to build something, I found the pieces. If I wanted to avoid getting blamed for breaking something, Ryan usually took the blame anyway. Some things apparently survived adulthood. "You know," I said, "we actually made it." Ryan looked over. "Made what?" "The camping trip." He smiled. "The one we promised we'd take when we were 12. "I remember." "You remember?" "I was there." "You're impossible. You're the one who forgot." "I didn't forget." "You absolutely forgot." I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped, because he was right. I had forgotten. Not completely, but enough that the promise had become one of those childhood things that existed somewhere in the background of my memory. Ryan hadn't forgotten. He looked down at the food he was arranging. "You used to talk about it all the time. When I was 12. You said we'd go when we were adults. We are adults." "Exactly." He said it so simply that I didn't know what to say. The rain struck harder against the roof. I looked toward the window. "How long do you think we're stuck here?" "Probably until morning." "That bad?" Ryan nodded. I believed him. We ate sitting across from each other, passing food back and forth without thinking about it. The conversation wandered through old stories, people we used to know, places we'd lived, jobs we'd hated. Eventually Ryan leaned back against the wall. "What about you? What about me? You ever think you'll settle down?" I looked at him. "With what?" "Someone." The question felt strangely direct. "I don't know." "You've dated." "A little." "A little?" "Don't interrogate me." Ryan smiled. "I'm not interrogating you. You're doing the voice." "What voice?" "The Ryan Mercer interview voice." He laughed. Then his expression softened. "Seriously?" I looked down at my hands. "I guess I haven't met the right person." Ryan was quiet. "What about you?" I asked. He shrugged. "Same. You've dated more than I have. Doesn't mean any of them were right. There was something different in his voice now. Not sadness exactly. Something guarded. I didn't push. Later, when the temperature dropped, I tried to ignore how cold I was. Ryan noticed anyway. Without saying anything, he picked up the warmer blanket and handed it to me. You take it. You'll be cold. I'll survive. Ryan. Evan. The way he said my name ended the argument. I pulled the blanket around myself. Thanks. He nodded and looked away. Eventually, exhaustion won. I closed my eyes, listening to the rain. I don't know how long I slept. When I opened them again, the shelter was dark except for the faint light coming through the window. Ryan was still awake. He sat near the door, watching the storm outside. I shifted beneath the blanket. He turned. You okay? Yeah. Go back to sleep. I watched him for a moment. Why aren't you sleeping? Ryan looked back toward the window. I just wanted to make sure you were still here. Something about those words stayed with me long after I closed my eyes again. The storm kept us inside the shelter for most of the night. Every so often, thunder rolled across the mountains, making the wooden walls tremble. Neither of us seemed ready to sleep again. Ryan sat across from me, his back against the wall, his knees drawn up slightly. The faint emergency light above the door made the room feel smaller than it was. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. You know, I said, for someone who planned this whole trip, you have terrible timing. Ryan smiled. The weather wasn't part of the plan. You checked the forecast. I checked it, and still brought me here. You said you wanted an adventure. I said camping. Same thing. I laughed quietly. For a moment it felt normal again. Then Ryan looked at me. Do you ever think about how different everything is now? Compared to when we were kids? Yeah. I nodded. When we were 12, I thought we'd still be doing this kind of thing together when we were 40. Ryan's smile faded slightly. You thought that? I did. He looked down. I always assumed you'd be there. The words were simple, but something in his expression made them feel heavier. I shifted closer against the wall. You say that like you're surprised. I'm not. Then what? Ryan hesitated. Nothing. I knew that answer. It was the same answer he'd given me countless times when we were younger, whenever something mattered too much for him to explain. I watched him for a moment. You ever avoid something because you're afraid you'll lose it? Ryan looked up. The question seemed to catch him off guard. Sometimes. Why? Because some things aren't worth risking. I swallowed. Even if you want them? His eyes stayed on mine. Especially then. Neither of us spoke. Outside, another burst of rain swept across the trees. I looked away first. What happened to all those people you dated? I asked, trying to make my voice lighter. Ryan gave a quiet laugh. Changing the subject? Completely. Coward. Absolutely. He smiled, but it didn't last. Most of them wanted something I couldn't give. What couldn't you give? I don't know. You don't know? Ryan rubbed his thumb along his palm. I didn't want to promise something when I wasn't sure. I studied him. Were you ever sure about anyone? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, Not like that. The room suddenly felt warmer. I looked down at the blanket. Ryan shifted beside me, closer than before. I've avoided relationships because losing someone matters more to me than being alone, he said. My chest tightened. Someone specific? His eyes met mine. For a second, I thought he was going to answer. Instead, he gave a small, almost nervous smile. Maybe. That's not an answer. I know. Another crack of thunder shook the shelter. Without thinking, Ryan reached across the space between us and took my hand. His fingers closed around mine. The contact was deliberate. Neither of us moved. I could feel the warmth of his hand against mine, steady and careful. Ryan looked at our hands. Then he looked at me. I didn't pull away. He didn't either. For several seconds, the storm outside seemed impossibly far away. Then Ryan slowly released my hand. We should sleep, he said. I nodded. Yeah. He turned toward the other side of the shelter. I lay back beneath the blanket, staring into the darkness. But sleep didn't come, because whatever had just happened between us no longer felt accidental. Morning came without sunlight. The storm had weakened, but rain still tapped against the shelter roof, and the mountains outside remained covered in gray mist. Ryan checked his phone again before putting it away. Still nothing. No signal. So we're staying. For a little longer. I watched him move around the shelter, checking the supplies and looking toward the trail through the window. Everything about him seemed normal, practical, calm, familiar, except I couldn't stop thinking about his hand around mine, or the way he'd looked at me before letting go. Ryan noticed me watching him. What? Nothing. You've been saying that a lot. So have you. He smiled faintly, but neither of us laughed. After breakfast, Ryan sat beside me on the bench. We should probably talk about last night. My stomach tightened. About the hand-holding? Among other things. I looked at him. He took a slow breath. When I said I wanted to make sure you were still here, I remember. I meant it. I know. Ryan stared at the floor for a moment. I've been trying not to say something for a long time. The shelter suddenly felt very quiet. I waited. He looked at me. I don't know when it started. What started? Ryan hesitated. This. My heart began beating faster. The way I feel about you. I didn't move. He continued before I could respond. I've told myself it was just because we've known each other forever, that you're my best friend. That of course I care more about you than other people. He gave a nervous laugh. But that explanation stopped working a long time ago. I swallowed. How long? I don't know. You must have some idea. Ryan looked away. Long enough. The answer hurt and comforted me at the same time. I stared at my hands. I've wondered. He turned back toward me. You have. I nodded. For longer than I wanted to admit. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to see that he had been afraid of hearing those words. I didn't say anything because I couldn't risk losing you, he said. You thought you'd lose me? If I was wrong. And if you weren't? Ryan looked directly at me. I still didn't know what would happen. The storm outside seemed quieter now. I looked at him. What do you want to happen? Ryan didn't answer immediately. I want to know what this could be. My throat tightened. So do I. He shifted closer, but stopped before touching me. Evan. Yeah. Can I kiss you? For a second, I could only stare at him. Then I nodded. Ryan leaned toward me slowly, giving me enough time to change my mind. I didn't. His lips met mine gently. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It felt strangely familiar, like something that had been waiting underneath 17 years of friendship for permission to exist. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. Ryan rested his forehead lightly against mine. Then he whispered, when we get out of here, we have to talk about what this means. I closed my eyes, because the storm had given us a reason to stop pretending. But soon, the storm would be over. For the first time since the storm began, the rain started to fade. What had been a constant roar became a soft tapping against the shelter roof. Gray daylight slowly returned through the window, revealing the wet trees and mist hanging between the mountains. Ryan checked his phone again. 1 bar. Does that mean we're free? Not yet. He looked toward the trail. Give it a little time. I nodded. Neither of us mentioned the kiss. Not because it had been forgotten, because neither of us knew how to act like it hadn't changed everything. Eventually, Ryan stood and gathered the supplies. Ready? I nodded. We packed quietly. The shelter looked different in daylight, smaller somehow. The bench where we'd slept, the blankets, the empty food wrappers. All of it carried the memory of the night before. I looked at Ryan. He was avoiding my eyes. You okay? Yeah. You sure? He glanced at me. Yeah. The answer sounded exactly like the ones I'd given him the night before. That made me smile despite myself. What? Nothing. Ryan shook his head. Come on. We stepped outside. The air was cold and damp, and water dripped from every branch. The trail was muddy, but the worst of the storm had passed. Ryan moved carefully, testing each section before telling me where to step. I followed close behind. Neither of us talked much. There was no reason to. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was just full. After several minutes, Ryan stopped. "You okay? My hand hurts a little." He looked immediately toward the small bandage on my hand. "Let me see." I held it out. He examined the scrape, then nodded. "Still fine. You sound disappointed. I'd prefer you completely uninjured." I smiled. He looked at me for another second before turning back toward the trail. We continued down the mountain. By the time we reached the campground, the clouds had begun breaking apart. The storm had left branches scattered across the ground and water pooled around the campsite. Our tent was damaged. One side had collapsed beneath the weight of the rain. Ryan stared at it. "Well," I laughed softly. "That's one way to end a camping trip." He smiled, but only briefly. We spent the next hour gathering our things and checking what had survived. Ryan focused on the practical details, sorting wet gear from dry gear and making sure nothing important had been lost. I watched him. He kept finding reasons not to look at me. Finally, I said, "Ryan." He stopped. "About yesterday." His shoulders tightened. "Yeah. You don't have to pretend it didn't happen." He looked at me then. "I know. Do you regret it?" His expression changed. "No," the answer came quickly, too quickly to be fake. But he still looked uncertain. "I just don't know what we're supposed to do now," he admitted. I nodded. Neither did I. Then his phone buzzed. He checked the screen. "The road out should reopen tomorrow morning." I looked toward the mountains. Tomorrow. The word felt heavier than it should have. The storm had kept us together. Now the storm was ending. And suddenly, leaving didn't feel like freedom at all. That evening, the campground was quiet. Again, the storm had moved on, leaving the trees dripping and the ground covered with broken branches. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. We had managed to salvage enough of our gear to stay one more night. Ryan rebuilt part of the campsite while I sorted through our bags. We worked side by side without talking much. It should have felt like before. Didn't. Every time our eyes met, I remembered the shelter, the conversation, his confession, the kiss. And now the road would reopen in the morning. I sat beside the remains of the fire while Ryan checked the damaged tent one more time. "You don't have to keep fixing that," I said. "I know. You've been fixing it for 20 minutes. I like having something to do." I looked at him. "Because you don't want to talk?" He stopped. "Maybe." I waited. Ryan sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I asked, "Do you think yesterday was a mistake?" His face tightened. "No." "Then why are you acting like it was?" "I'm not. You are." Ryan looked away. "I just don't know what happens when we leave." I swallowed. "Neither do I." He rubbed his hands together, staring at the ground. "We've been friends for most of our lives." "I know. If this goes wrong." He didn't finish. I understood anyway. "You're afraid we'll lose each other." Ryan nodded. "I'm afraid I'll lose you." The honesty in his voice hurt more than an argument would have. I looked toward the dark trees. "I've been afraid of that too." Ryan finally looked at me. "Then maybe we shouldn't." He stopped. "Shouldn't what?" "Risk it." The words hung between us. I felt something inside me drop. "So that's what you want?" "No," the answer came immediately. "Then what do you want?" Ryan looked frustrated with himself. "I want you." My breath caught. "But I don't know how to have you without risking everything we've already had." I stared at him. "That isn't the same as wanting to stop." "I know." "Then don't decide for both of us." Ryan looked down. "I don't want to hurt you." "You might." His eyes lifted. "So might I." Neither of us spoke. The fire cracked softly between us. I finally said, "Ryan, if we go home tomorrow and pretend nothing happened, I can't keep doing this." He went still. "I can't go back to being your best friend and pretend I don't feel what I feel." Ryan's expression softened. I know. I mean it. I know. I stood. I don't need you to promise me anything tonight. He looked up at me. I just need you to be honest. Ryan nodded slowly. I'll be honest. I started toward my tent. Evan. I turned. He seemed ready to say something, but stopped. Good night. Good night. I walked away. Behind me, I could feel his eyes following me. The storm was gone. The road would open in the morning. And for the first time, Ryan had no weather, no danger, and no excuse left to hide behind. Morning came clear and cold. For the first time since we arrived, sunlight reached the campground without fighting through clouds. The road was open again, and other campers were already packing their vehicles. The mountain looked completely different without the storm hanging over it. Ryan stood beside the campsite, loading the last of our dry gear into his truck. I carried my bag over and placed it in the back. That everything? Yeah. He nodded. Neither of us moved. There it was again, that silence that had nothing to do with the absence of words. Yesterday, the storm had made every decision for us. Where we stayed, how close we stood, how long we had to remain together. Today, we were free to leave. And somehow that made everything harder. Ryan closed the truck bed. Evan. I looked at him. He seemed like he had been rehearsing something. I don't want you to think last night was just because we were trapped. I said nothing. I've been thinking about what you said. Which part? That you can't pretend anymore. I looked down. Ryan stepped closer. I don't want you to pretend. My chest tightened. Then what do you want? He took a breath. I want to take you on a date. I looked at him, almost certain I'd heard him wrong. A date. An actual date. He gave a nervous laugh. Not a camping trip. Not because we're stuck somewhere. Not because there's a storm coming. I smiled despite myself. You're nervous. I've never had to ask my best friend out before. You've had 17 years to practice. Apparently, I needed all 17. I laughed. Then his expression became serious again. I've spent years telling myself that keeping you in my life was more important than wanting anything different. He paused. And it is. My smile faded. But I don't think those things have to be opposites anymore. I looked at him. What if it changes everything? It will. The certainty in his answer surprised me. Ryan stepped closer. But maybe it changes it into something better. I felt the old fear rise again. The fear of losing him. The fear of waking up one day and realizing we'd destroyed the friendship that had carried us through childhood and adulthood. Ryan seemed to see it on my face. I can't promise this won't be scary, he said. I can't promise we won't make mistakes. That's reassuring. He smiled. But I can promise I'm choosing this now. I stared at him. The storm is gone, I said. I know. We're safe. I know. And you're still choosing me? Ryan nodded. I'm choosing you. Something inside me finally loosened. I stepped closer. This time, there was no emergency shelter around us. No thunder. No reason we had to stay together. Ryan lifted his hand, stopping just short of touching my face. Can I? I nodded. He kissed me. It was different from the first kiss. That one had happened in the middle of fear, uncertainty, and isolation. This one happened in sunlight, with an open road behind us, with nothing forcing either of us to stay. When we pulled apart, Ryan smiled. So, he said, first date. I smiled back. First date. For the first time, I understood what the storm had actually changed. It hadn't created something between us. It had simply taken away every excuse we had for hiding it. 3 weeks later, I was sitting across from Ryan at a small outdoor cafe near the city, watching him struggle to unfold a paper napkin without tearing it in half. You know, I said, for someone who survived a mountain storm, you're having a hard time with that. Ryan looked at the napkin. This is different. There are no survival instructions. I laughed. It still surprised me how natural this felt. We had spent most of our lives being best friends. Now we were learning how to be something else without losing everything that came before. There were awkward moments. There were pauses when one of us didn't know what to say. There were times when I caught myself wondering whether we were moving too quickly. But Ryan never pulled away. Neither did I. He reached into his jacket pocket. "I brought you something." He placed the old camping notebook on the table. I stared at it. "You kept this." "I told you. I remember a lot." I opened the cover. The pages were worn and slightly warped from the shelter. Near the back was the old promise we'd written as kids. Someday we would go camping together. I smiled. "You actually wrote the date." Ryan pointed to the bottom of the page. I added another one. Beneath the old childhood date was a new date from 3 weeks earlier. The day we had finally taken that trip. And beneath it, Ryan had written another line. "Our first real date." I looked up at him. "So the camping trip counts?" "The first one does." "And the second?" Ryan smiled. "That one is still happening." I closed the notebook. For years, I had thought becoming something more with Ryan meant risking the friendship that had always felt permanent. But sitting there with him, I realized I had been looking at it backward. The friendship wasn't something we'd left behind. It was the reason this worked. The storm hadn't created our feelings. It hadn't magically turned two friends into something else. It had simply forced us to stop hiding from what had already been there. Ryan reached across the table and took my hand. No storm. No emergency. No mountain shelter. Just him choosing to hold my hand because he wanted to. "Where should we go next?" he asked. "Next? Camping." I smiled. "Anywhere." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Anywhere. As long as I'm going with you." His smile answered before he did. For once, neither of us needed a storm to keep us together.